The readings on stage this evening, like the books on the tables and the film on the screen, live in a past that is never dead. Better yet, as William Faulkner liked to say, is not even past. History is the generative and inexhaustible storing up of human energy and thought that is mankind's most bountiful creation and most precious inheritance. The inheritance that the poet Johann Wolfgang von Goethe had in mind when he suggested a restructuring of the buyout deal that Mephistopheles offered Faust. It isn't with magic that men and women make their immortality. They do so with what they have seen and learned on their travels across the frontiers of the millennia, salvaging from the ruin of families and the death of cities what they find to be useful or beautiful or true. Their observations, preserved on scraps of papyrus and scratchings in stone, in epic poems and quadratic equations, confessions, voluntary and coerced, 5-act plays and 3-part songs. The story, painted on the old walls and printed in the old books, is also our own. The value of the historical record is in line with George Orwell's dictum, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." Orwell was talking about history as propaganda bent to the service of the state. Turn the dictum to the service of the individual, and it sustains the proposition that history is the root of all education, social and scientific, political, literary, and economic. Who is the who controlling the past, if not oneself? And how else do we settle the wilderness of our experience, if not with the shaping and reshaping of a once upon a time? The heavy loss of a historical consciousness in both the public and private sectors of the American Commonwealth is one that the citizenry of a democratic republic can ill afford. History is to the nation as memory is to the individual, and a nation ignorant of its past cannot make sense of its present or imagine, much less compose or construct, its future. Not only are we losing track of our own stories, who we are, where we've been, or where we might be going, but our elected representatives forget why sovereign nations go to war or how it comes to pass that money doesn't grow on trees. The blessed states of amnesia cannot underwrite either the hope of individual liberty or the practice of democratic self-government. Cicero made the point 50 years before the birth of Christ. Not to know what happened before one was born is always to be a child. Children unfamiliar with the world and time make easy marks for the dealers in junk science, dysfunctional politics, and quack religion. Absent an acquaintance with history, we have no weapon with which to protect the future, no footing on which to stage a revolt against what G.K. Chesterton once called the small and arrogant oligarchy of those who merely happen to be walking about. Each age revises its view of the past to fit the contours of its present, which is why history is akin to the playing with a kaleidoscope, a constant writing and rewriting, never destined to reach a final verdict or discover the lost gold mines of the imperishable truth. To read 3 histories of America in the 1870s, one of them published in 1900, the others in 1930 or 1976, is to travel in 3 different Americas on which the sun never sets. The must-see tourist attractions remain intact. Colonel George Custer is still there on the hill at the Little Bighorn, Mrs. Astor at home on Fifth Avenue, President Ulysses S. Grant in the same time zone with Queen Victoria, Edgar Degas, and Otto von Bismarck. But as to the light in which the dramatis personae are to be seen, accounts differ. History is not what happened 200 or 2,000 years ago. It is a story about what happened 200 or 2,000 years ago. And what attests to the truth of the tales told by historians is the force of their imagination and the power of their expression. Simon Schama is an historian blessed with an abundance of both of those assets, which is why Lapham's Quarterly is proud to present him this evening with its annual Janus Prize. This year, the Folio Society's limited edition of Charles Montagu Doty's Travels in Arabia Deserta. A man of many seasons who writes as clearly as he sees, Simon can be trusted to return from his travels in time, whether in the biblical land of Israel or in Rembrandt's 17th century Amsterdam, with a reliable report of an informed source. The program lists his many distinctions and accomplishments, but what it doesn't say is that 17 years ago, he was present at the creation of Lapham's Quarterly, the man from whose teaching and inspiration I borrowed the courage to devise the prototype, for which Simon wrote the introduction. It was another 10 years before I could bring the publication into being, but what Simon wrote in 1997 stands in 2014 as a true statement of the Quarterly's once and future intent. The past, he said, should get under our skin, working its way stealthily into our cultural bloodstream, its transformation of our knowledge of who we are, having the stealthy potency of poetry or philosophy, which is the mark of Simon's work, both then and now, and why I count it an honor to introduce you to the pleasure of his company. Simon? There you go. Let's go. That's your
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Dear Lewis, the honor is very much mine. This is really an overwhelming honor, a Lapham of honor, you might say, which I'm very, very happy and humbled to run. It's above all, it's an extraordinary achievement to actually have both conceived. I really oughtn't to take the credit at all for this, Lapham's Quarterly, and then to have carried it out. There's a famous pudding in old English cookbooks called a salmagundi. Sometimes, actually, it can be contrived as a confection, sometimes as a salad, and it is essentially the gastronomic equivalent of something which is more than its parts. The parts are various, they're nutritious, and they deliver, for those of us who have actually sampled a salmagundi at the more ancient, if not actually moldily decrepit institutions of British higher education, I can promise you, a knockout blow. There's nothing decrepit, but there is everything that's a knockout blow about Lapham's Quarterly. And I want to talk just a little bit in a minute about how it brings together, and Lewis was so kind to suggest that I might have had something to do with it, the two essential qualities of great history: its civic energy, its didactic energy, its sense of being indispensable to the way we live our lives as a decent, democratic, free society, and on the other hand, the enchantment of storytelling. Both those two things are indispensable to each other if history is going to work. I was thinking about the 1870s, as per the brief, and trying to think and thinking particularly of something which put me in mind of Lewis's intellectual energy. What he does so extraordinarily well is something America desperately needs, and that's the rage of reason. Everything in our political community is so damn polite. NPR is so polite. It sounds a weird thing to say in the world of Rush Limbaugh, let's say, but the bad guys get all the joy of impoliteness. We need someone like Lewis, and we need, and check out, what he has to say in the current number of Revolution. I like to think of Lewis in the company of the great, those who are enraged with rational discourse. God forbid, says Lewis in the current number, God forbid that the excitement of the 1960s, talking about how ashamed we are of that, enjoyably insurrectionary moment, God forbid that the excitement of the 1960s should in any way have interrupted the constant revolutionizing of the bourgeois desire for more dreams come true products to consume and possess. What is wanted now is a flow of emotion, not a train of thought, a vocabulary of images better suited to the selling of a product than an expression of an idea. It's Lewis's sort of absolute intransigent in the face of the banal seductions of public relations that is one of the things that makes his entire enterprise so honorable. Back to the 1870s, a face and a name that did not appear amidst this magnificent montage of images and names that we've both seen on the slideshow and heard is, I suppose, next to the Bible, the book that was absolutely bound to be on every shelf of anybody who wanted to be an active citizen as well as a connoisseur of art on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean and beyond, and that would be the works of John Ruskin. Ruskin introducing Fors Clavigera, his attempt to make contact with the working men of Britain. It didn't help, actually. If you're going to make contact with the working men of Britain, it probably doesn't actually help to call it by some incredibly obscure Latin title, which Lapham's Quarterly does not, which sums up both Hercules, Ulysses, and Lycurgus. That's right, the club, the nail, meaning Lycurgus's law, and the key, Ulysses' key of understanding. And rather wonderfully, Ruskin, in the initial introduction to the first letters which he sent out into the world to the working men of Britain, simply said, well, I've done this in order to give you my state of mind, as if every working man would down their tools in order to hear what he thought about Starlings or the Reservoir, the first Hawthorne, or the ugliness of Dutch painting, or that sort of, which he did feel strongly about. It was pointed out to him that he was supposed to be writing things which the working man might want to hear. And so he had a slightly self-chastening second introduction. I think later in the 70s, might even have been as late as the 6th or 7th volume, around 1878. This reminded me wonderfully of Lewis in his raging prime. This book, said Ruskin, has now become a call to all whom it can reach to choose between being honest and dishonest. If they choose to be honest, also to join together in a brotherhood, separated visibly and distinctly from cheats and liars. Bravo Ruskin, bravo Lewis, in that particular shared enterprise. Ruskin was one of those, and you've seen actually a parade of them. Mark Twain, extremely amusing, but remember Mark Twain, particularly in his old age, when he could ill afford to antagonize the American establishment, was the most ferocious voice raised against the crime, really, the American war in the Philippines.